But in my in-ground plots, even though we have relatively sandy soil around here, once you start getting to a certain depth there, that soil gets a lot harder. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all you are having an awesome day. It is Saturday, February 22nd here in South Georgia, and once again it is tater time. So in today's video, we're going to contrast our raised bed tater planting and growing strategy with our in-ground tater planting and growing strategy, and I'm going to tell you why you don't need to plant your in-ground taters that deep. So last week we got our raised bed taters planted. We put 3 rows, a pound in each row, so 3 pounds total in this 4x6 raised bed here. And just to be clear, because we did have some follow-up questions to that video, you don't have to plant 3 pounds or 3 rows in a 4x6 bed like that. If you've got more raised bed space or you don't have quite that many seed taters, you don't have to plant that much in a single 4x6 bed. My goal was just to show you how much you could grow in a 4x6 bed, planting 3 pounds and hopefully harvesting around 30. Now we have had a couple heavy rain events since we planted these, which can be a cause for concern if your soil doesn't drain that well. But this soil in the raised bed drains really well, so we're not really worried about our taters rotting. And as I always like to do, because I get paranoid about my taters coming up, I like to pull one up every now and then just to check, make sure we've got roots. And we've got some really nice roots on that seed piece there. So all is good. We should start seeing some above ground vegetation here in the next week, week and a half. Now in that raised bed tater plant video, I mentioned 6 really easy tips that would help you convert that 3 pounds of seed taters to at least 30 pounds of eaten taters. And I won't re-mention all those 6 tips, but at the end of the video, I'll refer you to that just in case you missed it. But the general concept with the raised bed tater growing is that we have limited space. Most people that are growing in raised beds do have somewhat limited space. We have limited space, so we're trying to grow as many taters as possible in that given 4x6 bed. And in just a 4x6 bed like that, it's pretty easy to feed and water those taters. That's why we can crowd them in there a little bit more, plant them a lot thicker, because it's not gonna break the bank fertilizing that 4x6 bed, and it's easy to go out and water just that little bed every afternoon. And as we'll discuss much more here in a minute, we plant them deeper in the raised bed than we do in the in-ground garden. That's because that soil is much softer. They're a lot easier to dig because the soil is the same consistency from the top of that bed to the bottom of that bed. Doesn't really matter how deep they're planted in there. We can easily reach down in there and harvest with our hands. But in the in-ground garden, we do it a little bit differently for several reasons. One of those being we just have more space to work with there. We've also got varieties that we really like that we want to grow more of. So we've just got a pound of each variety in that raised bed there. But we've got 2 home run varieties, the Baltic Rose and the Huckleberry Gold, that we like to grow in the in-ground garden every year. We really like those varieties, so we want more taters to eat from those 2. So this is where we're going to be putting our in-ground taters today. Just 2 rows. We'll have a 30-foot row of Baltic Rose and a 30-foot row of Huckleberry Gold going right in here beside those beautiful 4 rows of English peas and some greens from the fall that are still doing great. So in the in-ground garden, our tater rows are obviously farther apart, and I like to put mine about 3 to 4 foot apart. You go closer than that, you get closer to 2 foot apart, it can be a little more difficult to heal them. So in the in-ground garden, we heal our potato plants by pulling soil from beside the row onto those plants. Different than how we do it in the raised bed, where we're just taking a couple bags of mushroom compost or something like that and kind of pouring it alongside those plants. Wouldn't really be that practical to use a bunch of bag compost in an in-ground garden when you're dealing with 2 30-foot rows. Now the other big difference with the in-ground planting here is we're not planting them near as deep. You can see those furrows I've made there. They're only about 3, maybe 4 inches deep. Now, I have heard some folks say they will plant their in-ground taters as much as 6 to 8 inches deep. That way they don't have to worry about hilling them as much. And if you can dig that deep fairly easily in your in-ground garden, go for it. But in my in-ground plots, even though we have relatively sandy soil around here, once you start getting to a certain depth there, that soil gets a lot harder. You can see the color change down there in the bottom of that furrow compared to this stuff up top here. So the deeper I try to dig, the harder it is to do it. So for some people, it's going to be a little tough to dig a 6 to 8 inch trench in their in-ground garden. But the main reason I don't like to plant my in-ground taters that deep is for ease of harvesting. So assuming you've got some nice soft soil on top, just in the first few inches there, I think you're way better off planting them shallow and then hilling your potatoes with that nice soft soil. So come May, when I send the boys out here to harvest these taters, we don't have to get out a digging fork, we don't have to get out a shovel, we can harvest them with our hands. We don't have to worry about, you know, stabbing any taters while we're harvesting. We can just dig around in those hills with our hands and harvest them a lot more easier. So if I dig a trench 6 to 8 inches deep and plant my taters in that, definitely going to have a shovel or a digging fork when it comes harvest time. Going to be a lot more labor intensive harvest that way, and I'd rather just take advantage of that nice soft stuff on top, push that around the plants, and then it's really easy to find our taters come harvest time. So in the in-ground garden, our row spacing and our planting depth is different, but our seed spacing is exactly the same. We still want to put these seed pieces about 6 to 8 inches apart. Probably got these two rows here closer to 6 inches. We got the Baltic rose right there and the Huckleberry Gold right there. So whether we're growing it in the raised bed and really trying to stack them in there, or growing in the in-ground and giving those rows a little more space, we're still going to plant about 1 pound of cut taters per 6 foot of row, or like an in-ground plot right here, 5 pounds of cut taters for a 30-foot row. And because I think this information is so valuable, let's go through a couple scenarios on whether you might want to cut your taters or just plant them whole. Now right here, I've got a couple Sharpo Mira taters that I harvested last May, and I wanted to show these. We talked about this on one of our YouTube shorts last week, but not everybody sees those. These store really, really well. This Sharpo Mira variety stores better than any variety I've ever grown. So of the few taters that I had left over from last year's harvest, most of them were all shriveled up like a prune. They had some sprouts on them. They didn't look that great. These Sharpo Mira taters, on the other hand, feel nice and firm still. The sprouts haven't gotten too long, and these would be perfect seed taters to plant right now. So if you're wanting a tater that stores really long, that's also productive and tastes pretty good, this Sharpo Mira variety is a great one. Now I'm not going to plant this variety this year because we're growing Sharpo Una in the raised bed, but I expect that one to store pretty similar to this one here, but we'll see what happens. But anyways, back to the planting cut taters versus whole tater scenarios, and we demonstrated this a couple years ago with a really nice experiment. So if you've got 5 pounds of seed taters, that's all you've got, it's 5 pounds, and you've got 30 foot of row space in your garden, you're way better off cutting up those seed taters, spacing them 6 to 8 inches apart, and filling that entire 30-foot row. But if you've only got 15 foot of row space to work with and you still got 5 pounds of seed taters, just plant them whole. Because planting those whole taters is going to give you more weight of harvestable taters per plant, about 1.5 times as much as you would get planting the cut piece. So if you're limited on space, plant the whole taters. If you've got enough space to cut them, space them out 6 to 8 inches apart, do that, and you'll end up getting a larger total harvest. So it just depends on whether you're heavy on seed taters or heavy on row space. If you've got more seed taters and you've got row space, just plant them whole. If you've got more row space and you've got seed taters, cut them up and stretch them out. And here in a minute, I'll grab the wheel hoe and zip up these rows to cover these 2 rows of seed taters. Not putting a ton of soil on top of these. Remember, we're not wanting to plant these super deep. I just want to put enough soil on top of them that they don't get uncovered if we get a heavy rain. We're going to add plenty of soil later, some of this nice soft soil beside these rows, but right now we're just wanting to put a couple inches on top of them. And before we go, I'll mention this because we get asked this all the time. Do you water the taters before they emerge from the soil, or just let it stay dry, wait till you see some vegetation, and then start adding water? And I think it depends a little bit on the situation. Now, in the in-ground garden, I never water my tater rows until I start seeing some consistent above ground vegetation. In that raised bed, however, which can dry out much faster, and as I showed you earlier, we've already got roots on those seed taters. If that raised bed soil was to start to get pretty dang dry, I might give it a little splash of water so those roots did have something to consume there. So I'll keep an eye on it, but I'm not watering it regularly by any means. Just gonna make sure that soil just doesn't get baked dry. So I hope you enjoyed the video today. Hope everybody has a great tater harvest this year. And let me know in the comments below if you do things differently than we do here, how you do them differently, why you do them differently. That way other gardeners can get some ideas as to how they might want to do things in their garden. And as always, if you want to grow some of the same varieties we're growing, you can find seed taters at woodprairie.com. Be sure to use the code LazyDogFarm to get a discount on your order. And if you missed that raised bed tater plant video where we talked about those 6 good tips, you can watch that right here. We'll show you how to turn 3 pounds into 30 pounds. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.